Welcome back to Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. We've entered 2024 facing two major wars, and with growing tensions in Yemen and Taiwan, it's easy to feel that there's trouble everywhere you look nowadays. Burrowing beneath the surface in all corners of the globe is this secret intelligence service, better known as MI6. But far from a life of James Bond's death-defying antics, its job is essential, rather prosaic, making the UK safer by stopping terrorism and disrupting the activity of hostile states. It's work that's increasingly put to the test in an ever more dangerous world. I'm joined now by Sir Richard Dearlove, who ran MI6 between 1999 and 2004. And he also now co-hosts a podcast, One Decision, on geopolitics. Morning, Sir Richard.
Good morning, Trevor.
First of all, I talked to David Cameron this morning about the situation in Yemen, or in the Red Sea, to be precise. Do you think that the action that we in the United States have taken against Houthis can be separated from the conflict in Gaza? Because Cameron was quite adamant about that. They're separate things.
It depends from which perspective you're looking at these events. The problem is, in the Middle East, in the Arab world, making that separation, particularly on the Arab street, is extremely difficult. But if one's being rational in analysis, I agree with David Cameron that freedom of navigation is a different issue from Gaza, but the Arab street doesn't think that.
But in a sense, in that case, that sort of makes it connected, because whatever we do has an impact.
Inevitably there's a connection. Then it's going to have an impact across the whole area. And I think what's extraordinary about Gaza is there's a lot of rhetoric coming from the Middle East about the fate of the Palestinians, but actual action to support them is very limited. The Egyptians don't want to...
You mean by Arab states and the Gulf states?
Yes. But I think the Houthi are, showing in their minds a degree of, sympathy. That's their excuse. But of course, there's quite a complex perspective internationally that lies behind these events.
The attacks that have been mounted by the United States and the UK with support of other states taking place over the last 48 hours, should we be feeling safer than we did on Thursday?
I don't think it immediately affects our safety. I think in terms of, let's say, access to the Suez Canal, which, we've seen what the consequences of a blockage of the Suez Canal can be. And that's really important if one takes a wider perspective of national security, security of trade, security of global trade. It's really important. But if you're talking about sympathetic radicalism and the events in the Middle East now motivating, let's say, domestic terrorism, well, there's a risk there. But I don't think, if you're looking at the Houthis specifically, do they have an infrastructure in the UK, which could be a sort of conspiratorial organisation to mount a terrorist attack? Unlikely. Very unlikely, in my view. But lone wolf-inspired event, it must, to an extent, heighten that. We've seen lone wolf attacks in the UK. Major conspiracies of terrorism, less likely. I think that's the way I would interpret it.
So actually, would that have been a factor in the decision-making, or would this decision to go with the United States on this have been purely a sort of foreign policy issue?
I think it's largely a foreign policy, national security issue. And you take the risk that, it might inspire a lone wolf attack. I think that's accepted.
The Houthis, of course, are saying that it's connected to Gaza. They also say that they are independent actors, independent of Iran. Do you buy that?
No. But I think look, there are three proxy organisations. There's Hezbollah, there's Hamas, there's the Houthi. I think Hezbollah and Hamas are much, much more controlled and closer to Iran. The Houthi, let's say, are two-thirds controlled. But I'm just using that as an example. The Houthi have been a sort of militant, tribal troublesome, independent, problematic group historically in Yemen for a very long time. I think
It started essentially as a religious sect, really.
it's a religious sect, but I mean, it's also got tribal origins. I mean, if the Iranians want to stop the Houthis, they certainly have the influence and the power over the Houthis to do that now. So, did they start this? I mean, I would draw a distinction between, their much more direct control of Hamas and Hezbollah. But the Houthi relationship with Iran is incredibly important. And let's face it, the armaments, the training, this all leads back to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, which are professionals at fighting arm's-length detached conflict using proxies. That's the way that the Iranians have made their troublesome influence globally felt.
There's one other big power which might have some influence here and for whom this matters. 60% of China's exports to Europe go through the Red Sea and Suez Canal. How do you think Beijing is thinking about how they should react to the disruption of trade? What do you think your sort of opposite numbers are saying to Xi Jinping?
Look, China is a maritime trading nation. It's a global trader. It depends also on security of the high seas. So this is a problem for the Chinese. But I mean, bear in mind the Chinese have, for a significant period of time, been trying to involve themselves in brokering agreements in the Middle East. And in fact, the irony is at the moment that you have the Chinese playing a role, in the fact that Iran and Saudi Arabia have been talking to each other. So, there are dimensions to this conflict which are quite complicated. The two Arab countries most damaged by the threat to the Suez Canal, I mean, the Saudi ports on the Red Sea, that's a problem for them. It's a massive problem for the Egyptian government. The Egyptian government's not going to be getting any income from the Suez Canal. So, I mean, this is a layered and complex problem.
On balance, though, would you agree that we are right to have done what we have done over the last 48 hours?
Absolutely. I don't think that the government has any choice. And I'm rather disappointed to see that both France and Italy had been reluctant to associate themselves with this offensive. And I mean, people are saying, well, the Houthis have sustained attack from the Saudis over a long period of warfare between the two countries. OK, there's a truce between them now. But I think it's true to say that, the Houthis being attacked by the US Air Force and the RAF is a rather different issue from fighting the Saudis over a long period of time. So I think there'll be, I think they will have got the message very significantly.
OK. Last question, really. If you were still in your old job, David Cameron said that there are flashing red lights all over the globe. And I guess that they'd be turning to you at the end of one of those long tables in that you see in the movies and saying, OK, Sir Richard, it's a year of big elections. We don't know who's going to be in power and so on. You've done your threat assessment. What are the two big threats that we ought to be paying attention to in 2024?
Well, seen from an intelligence perspective, the two things we need to worry about are obviously Ukraine and what China's long-term behaviour globally is going to be, particularly in relation to Taiwan and how threatening China is to Western interests. But I think it's important, but I'm not a politician. You have to add a political threat, which I'm worried about, which is Trump's re-election, which I think for the UK's national security is problematic, because if Trump, as it were, acts hastily and damages the Atlantic Alliance, that is a big deal for the UK. We've put all our eggs in defence terms in the NATO basket. If Trump really is serious about, as it were, changing the balance. I mean, the American nuclear umbrella for Europe is, in my view, essential to Europe's security and defence.
We will see.
But I mean, that's not an intelligence issue.
No.
This is a political issue.
No,
I was an intelligence officer, not a politician.
Well, you're an intelligence officer, but also an intelligence officer, and so I think we take that serious. I'll tell you what we'll do. As the primary season proceeds, we will come back to you and see whether you see those factors changing. So Richard, thank you very much indeed for your time.
12 months.